When we start a shir in Kuf Samach Gimel, even though it's not part of the Seder of Kelo, it's a few nekudas that are interesting in the Siman, which would be, it's a little bit different than the rest of the shiurim that we're discussing. It's not called a shir on something that you officially learned, but more certain concepts which come up and are a source of frustration in certain communities. And after this time, we'll just do this two sifim left from Kuf Samach Beis, which I didn't discuss last year. I'm going to get to it if I have time at the end. Kuf Samach Gimel is a siman which mainly discusses the responsibilities of people within a city. And we're talking about in the days when there was community boards, Zayin Tuvei Ha'ir, which is discussed in the beginning of Choshen Mishpat and other places, which they were in charge of collecting all the taxes. The Tsar would place a fine on the Jews or whatever it is, depending on his moods, and then the Jews had to collect it, v'chulu v'chulu, and there was a responsibility of the Jewish community to take care of it. There's also other communal funds and responsibilities that went into it. A lot of it doesn't apply today, which is why I didn't focus too much on the Siman, but there are certain nekudas, I didn't put it in the Seder Limud, but there are certain nekudas which are relevant, and I'm going to focus on them now, and also some interesting Sheidas Yehuda, Pshara he made in two little villages in Ukraine, back in the day. I think it's in Ukraine, or in Belarus. The Siman begins with, there are certain things that Bnei Ha'ir could be kai for each other to do. And the Rama right away adds, even a mute could be kai for the Rav. We know this concept of mute kai for the Rav from the previous two Simanim, from Kuf Samach Aleph, from Kuf Samach Beis, whether it's people within the same Chatzar, people within the same Mavai, certain things a mute could be kai for the Rav, it's a Tzerech Gadol, certain things a mute cannot be kai for the Rav, sometimes the Rav, sometimes you have to have a Rav to make a determination, and the Rav could be kai for the mute, and sometimes, which is usually in cases when it's not so clear for the Tzerech, and then you have things where even the Rav cannot be kai for the mute because they're not considered Bechlal or considered extras. So the Shulchan Aruch gives a list of things which are mentioned in the Mishnah and the Tosefta, which is basically build a shul, build a chayma with losses, build a wall, build doors, build a shul, buy a Torah Nevi'im and Ksuvim that anybody from the city could use. And obviously the Smer right away points out, this is back in the day when there was no printed books, today that doesn't apply. And the Rama adds, V'hu hadin l'chol tzorchei ha'ir. And this applies, this concept that you could be koife other people. The mute could be koife the Rav, or maybe the Rav could be koife the mute, could apply to kol tzorchei ha'ir. So we're going to see what exactly, when this kfiya applies. And then the Rama adds a bunch of other similar things of kfiya that we do, that koifin, these are not mentioned in the Mishnah and the Tosefta and the Gemara, these are mentioned in the Rishonim. And if you look in the Darkei Moshe, the first Darkei Moshe, especially if you look in the Darkei Moshe Ha'arich, in the beginning of the Siman, he quotes from a bunch of Rishonim different things that you koifa Bnei Ha'ir, the Bnei Ha'ir could be koifa each other, even a mute, to a Rav. The Rama over here brings a few of them in this one. There's some of them that he doesn't mention over here. They only mentions Darkei Moshe, and there's one that he mentions in Sif Gimel. But in Sif Aleph he says, for example, to be machnes oirchim, Bnei Ha'ir could be kai for each other, to give tzedakah to the oirchim, to force other people to give to the communal tzedakah fund. And then the Rama concludes, and any tzarchei tzibur, which the tzibur cannot come to a decision between themselves on how it should be done. So obviously we're talking about tzarchei tzibur, which might not exactly be things which the mute could be kai for the Rav, but they're this. So then all the balabatim of town should sit down together, and each one should accept upon himself that he's going to voice his opinion solely l'shem shamayim. And then you make a vote, and we go after the majority. And the majority could be koife the minority, even if you need to use courts to force the minority to cooperate. And obviously, today's achronim always add in all these cases. Obviously, first go to Bezdin. If you can't do it, then you go to court. But that's not what the Ramah says. And then the Ramah adds another thing. And somebody who refuses to say his opinion because of a certain chayrim, we don't count his vote as a yes or as a no, and we follow the majority of people who voiced their opinions. This is essentially Sif Aleph, the main points in Sif Aleph. So we have certain things that you could be koy for the mute, could be koy for the roiv, which are, for example, building a shul. Other additional things, the kol tzarchei ha'ir, that seems from the Ramah that also the mute could be koy for the roiv. And then there's some things that maybe the mute can't be koy for the roiv because you need a vote. But a vote means that everybody participates, and somebody who doesn't voice his opinion, his vote is not counted as a yes or as a no. Abstentions are deleted from the package, and you only go with the majority of those that stated their opinion. The Shach over here gives you a list of Maramekemis to look at. I'm only going to focus on two of them. The first one the Shach tells you to look at is Marim Mintz Siman Zayin. The Marim Mintz actually says that the mute to force a roiv is only on things which are mentioned in the Gemara, which are that list of things that the Mechaber mentioned, not the things that the Ramah mentioned, which are a door, the gate, the shul, the book of Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim. But anything else which the Rishonim added, no. Then that the mute cannot be koy for the roiv, but the roiv could be koy for the mute. And however, if you read the simple wording of the Ramah, it seems not so. It seems that the mute could be koy for the roiv even for the other things that the Rishonim mentioned, because the Ramah puts them all in one package, and then he lists a bunch of them. What is the Marim Mintz talking about? The Marim Mintz was talking about the mikveh nashim. There was a city where a woman would go tevel in the river. It was cold in the winter. And there was a problem. And they wanted to be Mesaken to build a mikveh. And the Marim Mintz says, being that the Roiv wanted to build a mikveh nashim, therefore there could be koy for the miyut. But since it's not mentioned in Gemara, if the miyut would not, if the Roiv would not want to participate in it, then the miyut would not be able to koy for the Roiv to build a mikveh nashim in this city. Why? It's not mentioned in Gemara. Might not be at Tzorech Godel because they could tevel in the river. Just a side note, if there is no river, you could be koy for a mikveh. Yeah, it's not so clear if the Marim Mintz would say that because there's no kfi, it's not mentioned in the Gemara. Kfi is a strong thing, and lav dafka, you could use it in anything, but from the Ramah, it's mashma, kol tzarech you could be koy for. The Aruch HaShulchan goes even further. The Aruch HaShulchan goes further than the Ramah. The Aruch HaShulchan, not stam like the Ramah. The way we understand the Ramah is that you koife on everything that's tzarchei ha'ir. And that would include
The Ramah, not only the Ramah argue, because it could be the Ramah is only talking about when it's tzarech also. It could be the Ramah will only say you can koife when it's tzarech.
Yeah, but the Marim Mintz's shitta is that if it's not mentioned in the Gemara, then it's not. Then you're not koyf on it. No, you need a roiv. It's still not. According to Marim Mintz, still not.
You don't have a mikveh in the city. You can't be koyf?
Ah?
You don't have a mikveh at all in the city.
From the Marim Mintz? The Marim Mintz says it's not written in Gemara. Can't be koyf. You have to get the majority to do it. If you live in a city where the majority don't want a mikveh, you're in a much bigger problem than the Marim Mintz, whether you can do a kfir or not. The Aruch HaShulchan says we're koyf on b'nias mikveh and merchotz. Yes, showers the tzorech gadol. The araya that showers the tzorech gadol. The Shevet HaLevi in the Shiurim explains that it's that side the Ramah and side the Aruch HaShulchan, when they talk about mikveh and all these things, the Ramah doesn't mention mikveh and all the other things, is talking about that the Reiv wanted it. He connects the Ramah with the Marim Mintz. He says that all the things the Gemara doesn't mention, and the Aruch HaShulchan also. When they say koifin, it's only talking about koifin when the majority want it and the minority doesn't want it. But not stam that these are the things that the minority wants and the majority doesn't want. But from the Aruch HaShulchan, it's not mashma like that. And from the Pashas Lashon HaRamah, it's not mashma like that. It's not mashma like that. And if you look at the Ramah at the end of Seif Gimel, It seems also that the Ramah, even though the Ramah quotes the Mari Mintz as his makar over there for a mikveh, still the way the Ramah phrases it, it looks like the Ramah says that your koife, that it would look like the miut is koife the roiv over there also. That's the way I understood the end of Seif Gimel. What does the Ramah over there says? Kol tzarchei ha'ir af al pi shemiktzoson einon tzrichim. Even though a minority of the people do not need it, it says kol tzarchei ha'ir. He uses the same lashon as kol tzarchei ha'ir they used before. Kegoyim beis chasnu say mikveh v'chadeime. Afilu hachi tzrichim litan chelka, and all have to pay, participate in it. Kol tzarchei ha'ir af al pi shemiktzoson einon tzrichin. Because some people don't need a mikveh, the women are past the stage anymore, or a person is not married yet. People still have to pay, the miut still has to give their money. So the Shevet HaLevi understood it, that means to say, it's only a din, if the roiv wants it, then the miut has to pay for it. And these kinds of things. If also the Rav wants it, the Rav wants. Yeah, but the fact is that Ramah uses the lashon kol tzarchei ha'ir over here and uses the lashon kol tzarchei ha'ir in Seif Aleph, and he attaches it to kol tzarchei ha'ir to what the Ramah, to what the Mechaber says. In Seif Aleph, the Mechaber, the Ramah begins what in the kol tzarchei ha'ir. It's a hemshech, the din of kfiya. Not in the beginning of Seif Aleph. Beginning of the Ramah. The Ramah adds two things. First, he adds the miut koifer saroiv, and then right after the kfiya. So if you would say, you could say that the mechaber doesn't hold b'cham. Maybe the roiv could be koifer the miut, but not the miut could be koifer the roiv, because even though the Gemara says the miut could be koifer the roiv. But for the Ramah, it's hard to say that the Ramah would suddenly say, and from now on weiter, kol tzarchei ha'ir is a different din. And then when the Ramah uses kol tzarchei ha'ir in Sif Gimel, kegoyin chasnus and mikveh, he's not referring to the same kol tzarchei ha'ir, the same lashon that he uses in Sif Aleph. It's hard to say that. It's hard to say that the Ramah follows the shit of the Mari Mintz, that the tzarchei ha'ir, kol tzarchei ha'ir, which he says v'hu adin, would apply that there should be that only that you need a roiv. Because the Ramah says, at the end of the Sif Aleph, things that you can't make a decision on, which means they are not decided, they are not considered for sure tzorech. There's a suffix if it's a tzorech gadol or not, something which we already saw in Kuf Samach Aleph. There are certain things where you have a suffix if it's tzorech gadol or not, that's when you need a roiv. Over here also, that's the mashmos, that's a simple mashmos of the Ramah. Now, the Shach also points out another interesting thing, which is, Shach also says to look in the Marila Beis HaLevi, Siman Chav Gimel. Shach brings a bunch of Anakim. One of them, the last one he mentions, Marila Beis HaLevi. The Bar Heitev quotes what the Marila Beis HaLevi is talking about, that if you had to, if a shul, the roof of the shul burnt and they were able to get permission to rebuild it, then the Ikra Itzah goes on the people that paid membership to the shul, the people that bought seats in the shul. Yeah. Now, what's mashma from the Marila Beis HaLevi is it's mashmos. Obviously, otherwise the Shach wouldn't quote it here. That the miut that you could be koy for the people who are part of the shul to participate in renovating the shul if they're not interested in paying for it. Now, if we're going to go into discussing the whole roiv,
Could be paid to other people.
Yeah, that's his mashma. It doesn't say that, but the fact that the Shach brings it here on the din of koifin, mashma, that he looks at all these manamikaimis as examples of places where kfiya would apply, of other examples of kfiya. And one of those would be renovating a shul. Now, renovating a shul, you could say the Mari Mintz would also agree, because renovating a shul, same as building a shul. A shul without a roof is the same as not having a shul, if it's a place where it rains. Before we go into the continue discussing how to calculate Reiv and all these things, I want to go into discussing a separate Nakuda. Like I mentioned, the beginning of the Siman brings a bunch of other examples of things that you're koife that are not mentioned in the Gemara. Some of them he mentioned in Sif Aleph. One of them he mentions in Seif Gimel. But this one he also mentions at the end of the Darkei Moshe. He brings us from Rabbeinu Yerucham, the Siv Chavtes Chelik Gimel, that Schar Limud, tuition, that the parents cannot pay, is a chiyuv on the kol to pay. And it goes, the rich person gives more to the pot, and the poor person gives less. And the Rama brings it in the end of Sif Gimel also. That's what the Rama brings in the end of Sif Gimel. Over there it says in a small city where you can't, then you're going to see the Alter Rebbe's medayik, that even though the Rama changed the lashon of the Rabbeinu Yerucham, it still means it's a chiyuv. We're going to get to the Alter Rebbe now. Now, the Rama just throws it as a one-line thing. The Alter Rebbe created a long, big seif out of it in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Perek Aleph, Halacha Gimel. Which, Chal Perek Aleph, Hilchos Talmud Torah, they say there's like a Perek in the Alter Rebbe, a lot of close the dinim of Hilchos Talmud Torah, but the din of Kfiya is in Sif Gimel through Sif Ches. Sif Gimel is about the community. With the Akdamah, Chachamim were Chazal were Mesakin that Rabbi Shua ben Gamla was Mesakin there should be Melamdim in every place. The Chachamim were Mesakin that every city, whether big or small, should have a Melamd, and everybody has to pay for it. The Alter Rebbe says in the Pnim, the minhag is in Medinei Seinu that everybody pays for their own tuition for their own kids. Im yodei maseges, if he could afford it. But if he cannot afford it, chayovim hatzibur lifroya ba'adoi, the tzibur is obligated to pay for it, mitakonas chacham, based on the takonas chacham. And the Alter Rebbe says, the poor people could go and they could force the rich people to put in money to the kupas hakol and to pay for their kids' chinuch. Not only that, even the rich people could be kind for each other. That is, you're putting money into the tuition fund. I don't have to pay on the side. We're all pouring money into the tuition fund, and we'll take from it also. Alter Rebbe says even if somebody doesn't have little kids, it means he's not having any enjoyment from the tuition project, and he's a rich guy, still has to pay for it. Still has to participate. Why? Because that is Takanas Chachamim. What is Takanas Chachamim? To have Melamdim in every city, and all the people of the city pay for it, each one according to his financial responsibility, and the Gemara does not make a differentiation between somebody who has kids and somebody who doesn't have kids. Takanas Chachamim was, even if somebody doesn't have kids, has to pay for it. And even Talmid Chachamim, which are in Kuf Samach Gimel, which are potter from certain taxes, and because that was they had special benefits for sitting and learning the whole day, still they still have to pay and participate kafima mainam according to their financial in the tuition funds of the community. The Alter Rebbe says weiter, the anim don't even have the power to be meichel on this. If the anim cannot afford it, they cannot go and could say, well, we decided we're going to be meichel our rights to have our kids being educated because we don't want to take money from the rich people. And the Alter Rebbe then continues that yes, there are big kehilas, and it seems like the Alter Rebbe looks at it in a beneficial way. They're big in the big communities. They made special chavuras that took care of the tuition. They made big groups, and the big groups of gvidim they will take care of paying off tuition. And in smaller places where you don't have a specific fund for tuition, it goes from the general community fund. However, the Alter Rebbe here adds something that this only applies to Takanas Chachamim. Takanas Chachamim was one teacher for 25 kids, and teaching them only Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim. But Mishnah and Gemara is not part of Takanas Chachamim. And therefore, for Mishnah and Gemara, the Aniyim have to pay from their own pockets. Nice Kuntra Sachran over here on this halacha, Kuntra Sachran Gimel. So where does Alter Rebbe say, where's the makar for this? This din that the poor people for this whole seif, essentially, is from the Rabbeinu Yerucham, which the Darkei Moshe brings here, in Siman Kuf Samach Gimel. That's what Alter Rebbe says. So the question is, why doesn't Alter Rebbe say that the Makir is from Sif Gimel and the Ramah? Well, Alter Rebbe then continues and says, but the Lashon of the Sif Gimel and the Ramah, it's mashman, it's not such a chiyuv. It's in a city where you're in, certain small cities where you can't afford a teacher, so there, the Kol pays for it. It seems like it's not mamash a full chiyuv. Alter Rebbe, but in the Rabbeinu Yerucham, it's mamash a full chiyuv. Alter Rebbe says, no. The Ramah used it because that's the Lashon, he took it from the Lashon of Rabbeinu Yerucham. But be'emes, the Lashon Alter Rebbe is chiyuva medina. It's a chiyuv al pidin in any place that the rich people have to pay for the poor people. And you could be careful for them to pay for the tuition of the poor people.
Why do you see that Ramah is not much like that?
No, the Ramah says in a small city where you can't afford it.
It's just saying because they can't afford it.
No, but it's a small city. Alter Rebbe says it. Huh? In a place where the people are Mashivim Lam Tinoikus and they can't afford it, the Alter Rebbe says no, it's a chiyuv to be Mashivim Lam Tinoikus. And it's a chiyuv to pay for it. And if they can't afford it, it becomes a chiyuv in the community. Don't say that it's in a place where they made a school and you can't afford it, then the rich people have to kick in. No, it's a chiyuv to have a school. It's a chiyuv to teach them. It's a chiyuv to pay for it. It's a chiyuv that the rich people should pay for it. No, the Alter Rebbe just points out, it says even though you could be medayik from the Lashon of the Ramah, maybe it's not such a chiyuv, it is a chiyuv. Huh?
What's the nafkamina is not a chiyuv?
It's not a chiyuv. There's no chiyuv to put schools in every place.
Are you saying after that then?
Yeah. So he says, no, Alter Rebbe says, no, even though you might be able to read the Ramah that way, no, it's still a chiyuv medina. The Alter Rebbe then continues and says, and what I wrote and what's mentioned about one teacher for 25 kids, only for Chumash, for Tanakh. He says that's a takana of Rabbi Shua ben Gamliel. But in today's day and age, he says, where the kids don't know Lashon Kodesh well, so it doesn't only include the psukim, it also includes translations to actually understand what they're reading, Pirush HaMilus of what they're reading. But again, the Alter Rebbe repeats, but not Mishnah and Gemara. Even though the Alter Rebbe says that in today's day and age, you only learn Mikra for 2 years, and then after you switch to Mishnah and Gemara. Still, the Alter Rebbe says, you only kaife on Mikra. And the Alter Rebbe says, could be that's the reason why today it's not so common to be kaife to be kaife for the rich people to pay for the schools, because if it's only one teacher for 25 kids and only to teach Chumash and only for 2 years, the poor people give the chanetza geben for one teacher. So therefore, it's not so common to have a teacher for 25 kids that none of the parents could afford it. And the poor people also want their kids to learn Mishnah and Gemara. And therefore, it already became, this whole kfiya thing for teachers already became cancelled, essentially. So I'm going to see the Shevet HaLevi actually says that today it's even more than it was then. But we'll get to it in a second. Alter Rebbe then continues in Sifdal through Sifches, if the father could afford, we're koi for him to pay for it, and just sitting as a side point to this, and you could be Yored L'Nechasav and take his money to be able to pay for tuition. And when the father is obligated to pay for it, he has to pay for it to learn the whole Torah Shebichsav and the whole Torah Shebal Peh with the halachas psukas, with all the time and even the halachas and mitzvahs which are not naik today, and to learn all the divrei chachamim that were based on that are Gadatas. And the Alter Rebbe later continues, this continues until he's able to in Sifdal through Sifches, until the kid is able to understand the Svara by himself. And Sifches, if the father can't pay for it, then you pay for his father, B'nei Bonim Areim Kebanim, etc. That is all Alter Rebbe and Hilchos Talmud Torah. Interesting tshuva from the Shevet HaLevi in Chelik Vov Siman Kuf Mem Zayin, where he discusses at length this whole Nekuda. And he actually brings Alter Rebbe and discusses the Alter Rebbe. First, I'm just going to give a few points that he discusses. Chelik Vav Siman Kuf Mem Zayin Shevet HaLevi. Number one, let's say you have a city which has a bunch of schools. Brooklyn, Mashal. There's a bunch of yeshivas. Each yeshiva, I'm not talking about Karanites, each yeshiva has its own community that it services. So you have a few Lubavitch schools, and you have Satmar schools, and you have Bava schools, and you have Vilna schools. Today you have more than one for each one, but each one is communities. So he says the chiyuv of bnei ha'ir is limited to bnei ha'kehillah. There's no more bnei ha'ir. You can't say that a person, a Lubavitcher, has to be mishtatif. You could be koife a Lubavitcher or a Satmaner to pay for chinuch of a different kreis that he's not part of. It's a kfiya. What it says, bnei ha'ir, refers to all the people who are part of this group. That's the first point he points out. Second thing he says, B'chlal, I have a suffix, that's the Shevet always says, I'm mistapik, that maybe the kfiya on the rich people doesn't only include the teachers, it includes everything around it. The busing, the building, of everything that's connected to the schools. And he says, and even though the Alter Rebbe says, we're only koife on what's takonas of takonas Rabbi Yeshua ben Gamla, still not the takonas chachamim. He still says we still do it. Not only that, he goes further. He says, in today's day and age, everybody sends their kids, the girls also get full education, even though it's not a chiyuv, al pi halacha. He says he paskins that you koifen also on paying for girls' schools.
Do you disagree with that?
Essentially, he says today the situation is different, and the question is what's nowadays. I'm just pointing out, Shevet HaLevi brings the Alter Rebbe and says that today the situation is different than in the Alter Rebbe's days. He says because today there's no, the education already, the system of education is different. Then every parent taught his kid, and the parents who weren't there, certain things were taught by Melamdim. So yes, the Melamdim would teach the kids certain things. I'm not telling you that you have to follow Shevet HaLevi. I'm just pointing out to you that Shevet HaLevi does bring, it doesn't ignore the Alter Rebbe, it brings the Alter Rebbe, and he still says that the situation from the Alter Rebbe's days to today's changed when it came to chinuch and the crucial importance of chinuch. And therefore, chinuch today, whether it's for boys or for girls, whether it's for Mishnah or for Gemara or for Chumash, whether it is the buildings and everything else, all became a choiv, a tzorech gadol on the tzibur, so much so that you could be koif for the tzibur to participate, and you could be koif for al pi moment. That's how he looks at it. Not telling you have to follow him, but it's definitely a good idea in certain scenarios, if instead of them wasting money on other things, they give it him. So, now, obviously, to add to it, to make it, there shouldn't be a machlokes between the Shevet HaLevi and the Alter Rebbe. It's clear that if the Roiv believes there's a tzorech gadol, the Roiv could be koif for the miut, right? That's clear. There's no argument on it. Everybody believes today that chinuch is a tzorech gadol. Nobody's going to tell you that education is a luxury. Camp is a luxury. Education is not a luxury. School is not a luxury. School is a necessity. It's a big necessity. So, even if it wouldn't be mitzat takonas chazal, mitzat tzorech gadol, you still could be koif.
But the tzorech gadol is not on the usher. If you don't have kids, then it's not.
Sure it is, because the same thing. If it's the same thing as for a mikveh, the Roiv wants it could be koif for the miut, and the Ramah clearly says in tzorech hayir, someone doesn't need beis chasnas, already married off all his kids. Still not.
The tzorech gadol doesn't have to be the way we do now. Technically, it could be children of the the tzorech gadol is they have to be in Talmud and Yeshiva.
Good. So how many years could you learn to? So the tzorech gadol should not be in the house.
Okay, fine. So that doesn't mean that the mikveh Mishnah, sorry, Mishnah Gemara, still the.
So whatever you need to keep them out of the house, they should come out to be from a yidden and yiddiness. That's a tzorech gadol. Just as much as tzorech gadol as it is to have food on Shabbos and all the organizations which give for it. Well, since we're discussing this majority-minority, there are long Pischei Tshuva, which gives you klalim on voting, and on majorities, and on minorities, and on people voicing their opinions. And it's also important that I bring it up. As elections comes up once in a while in certain communities, whether it's or there is decisions made within community community organizations or within the Rabbanim organizations, so it's important to know the halachas about it. Pesach Tshuva brings from a Noida B'Yehuda. Noida B'Yehuda, Kama, Choshen Mishpat Siman Chof. It's regarding Zayin Tuvi Ha'ir, which we're not going to get, Noida B'Yehuda, Choshen Mishpat, Noida B'Yehuda, Kama, Choshen Mishpat Siman Chof. Pesach Tshuva Sif Aleph brings a Sif Kotan Aleph. It's regarding Zayin Tuvi Ha'ir. But I'm not going into the Zayin Tuvi Ha'ir, I'm going to the concept that he explains over here. What was the story that made an Asifah to decide something regarding imposing some kind of tax on somebody or whatever it is? One of the Zayin Tuvi Ha'ir was not invited to the meeting, but the rest of the people were not. And they made a vote without him. Let's say there were 6, they made a vote, and 5 voted yes to do it. So even if he would have been there and voiced his opinion to no, it still would have been the majority without him, right? It would be 5 against 2. Now it's 5 against 1. He came and he said, I had what to say. And the Noida B'Yehuda says, even though there could have been a Rov without him, being that he had what to say, could be he would have convinced other people to change their minds, sway them. Therefore, the first vote is invalidated. Got to make a new vote with him there. Invite him there. Pesach Tshuva tells you, look in Knesset Agdela and Siman Yud Gimel, Agoyes Beis Yosef Eis Chav Daled, that even a new meeting is not going to help anymore. If you look over there, he doesn't give you exactly the reason why it is. But over there, it's talking about if you have a dayan which wasn't, if one of 3 dayanim didn't give his opinion, and there was 2 who already made a psak, whether you could have another meeting between the dayanim to change it. But it doesn't say why a second meeting is not going to help. If you look at the Mishnah gives a very interesting svara.
Who says this thing that you don't think it will work?
Knesset Agdela, Siman Yud Gimel.
Dayanim come and they discuss it, so they convince other people? That's the way Dayanim work?
No, within themselves. You have 3 dayanim.
3 Dayanim, they discuss it and they convince each other?
If need be, they have to figure out a psak. Sometimes, what do you mean? You sit in the Din Torah, and if you come, you think that it has to go a certain way. Bez nashava, not zabla. You think the psak has to go a certain way. Another dayan thinks that the psak has to go a different way. And the third dayan thinks the psak has to go a different way. It happens many times. And you discuss it until you come to psak. Otherwise, you have 3 disparate opinions, or each one presents his opinion. It's not a vote. I say $100,000, you say 80, and you say 50, or 2 says 100, and 1 says 0. It's not a vote. You pick out of it, you discuss it, and you figure it out. So that Knesset says that a new meeting is not going to help. And the Pesach Tshuva brings it and applies it here to this one. And the Mishnah says the reason is very simple. A person's negeh b'davar after he already made a decision. His mind is not going to let him be convinced and look like a fool that he made a decision one way. He's not going to change his mind anymore. It's a personal bias. His ego is not going to let him say, vote the opposite of what he voted last time, because the guy that didn't come to the meeting because they intentionally didn't invite him l'chayra because they didn't want to hear his opinion, is now going to sway him. Not about Dayan. He says it. I'm just saying, he brings formicatus for it. That's for a few hundred years ago. He understood the psyche of a person. A person, exactly, but a dayan is still a person. Shkem malach. Anyways, the Mishpat says it's a good svara. It's tzarechiyah. The Mata Shimon also says that it doesn't. Another asifa is not. Another meeting is not going to work when people already stated their opinion. Pesach Tshuva then discusses a big machlokes whether the Rov, let's say Zayin Tuvi, the Rov, or even the Rov of the city could make a decision to cause somebody specific hefsed or not. That means to create, let's say, discussion is, if the Rov of the city could come to create a tax on butchers. It's a big machlokes if you could or if you can't, but I'm not going to go into it now. And he brings in the Chasam Sofer over there, which is connected to that, but the one that could have in the Chasam Sofer, that if they announce publicly it's going to be a general meeting, and all the people have to come, and only 30 people showed up from 100, but it was a public announced meeting, everybody knew about it. Then the majority of the 30 call the shot for everybody. It doesn't say why. The Aruch HaShulchan says, very simple. Everybody knew there was a meeting. People who didn't care about the meeting to come is because they relied on the judgment of those who are going to come. That's why they didn't come. So therefore, if 30 people came out of 100, and from the 30, 20 voted, that means the other 70 agreed that those 30 are going to make a decision for them. I'll deal with it. Then there'll be a geschmack in Torah. Unless there's a minig fakert, obviously if there's a mekabel, sometimes you have bylaws. If you have bylaws of communities or bylaws of things, it says if there are certain things need a majority of the people who participate in businesses also. Certain things need a majority of the people who participate in the meeting. Certain things need a supermajority, which means a majority of the percentage majority, and certain things need to have a supermajority of the people that are part of it. Or it could be 60, 70, whatever it is percent. Sometimes it could be only 4 people showing up and 3 vote one way out of 12, and it'll still be good. Sometimes you need 7 out of 12. Sometimes you need 9 out of 12. It depends on if that's what they're mekabel upon themselves, and you follow that. Now, obviously, this is all talking about something which is tzedach gadol. It doesn't make sense that for something which is extras. If they decide that they want to plant trees and put benches, lav dafka that they could, even though they're going to do it for everybody equally, lav dafka that the mini roiv could be koifa and everybody to be moitzi moment. This koifin over here, this decision is usually talking about things which are tzedach gadol, and everybody gets to pay equally or lefi moment, but not that it's a discriminatory decision. How do you decide who's a member of town and who's not? That's in Sif Beis. It says somebody has a chutzner in a different city, and he lives in a different city. It means he has a chutzner in city A, and he lives in city B. The Mechaber says, to participate in digging the wells and all the things, all the water things, but not everything else. What's the other things? A gate, the gate, the fences, the locks, the shomer, everything else. Why is that? The Olam HaMishpat simply says, what's the main purpose of a fence? Nobody should steal things. Nobody's walking off with your chatzar. Chatzar is karka. Nobody could pick up karka and just walk off with it. So, boiris and these kinds of things, you use it, you participate in it. But the Olam HaMishpat says, but if there's takeh chashash, that they could do, that you do need the fence also for your chatzar that you have in a city, you have to participate in those things. Mata Shimon says, there's a point, he points out in addition to this, says chatzar, obviously we're talking about that the chatzar is empty, that's when the whole discussion is. But if the chatzar is rented out to somebody, and that person is now, let's say I live in city A, and I have a chatzar in city B, and I rent the chatzar in city B to somebody who lives in city B. That person is paying for it. So then the city B can't charge twice. They can't charge me because I own over there, and charge the renter who's renting for me. Only one payment they get. And the Mata Shimon also says the same thing that we have, even though it's not mentioned here in this siman, but the same thing that we had in the previous siman, that if somebody doesn't pay, you take away his property and you rent it out, applies over here in this siman also. And the Chaver then says if somebody lives for 12 months, becomes obligated in all the responsibilities of the city, and also somebody who buys a beis dira is obligated in everything. And the Smer right away says this whole number of 12 months is only for taxes, but the other things you're going to see for certain tzedakahs, it's after 3 months, certain tzedakahs after 6 months, certain tzedakahs after 9 months, different things. It's just for tzedakahs. He says, so just don't think that everything you have a 12-month free pass. The Mata Shimon points out, obviously, when you say he's living for 12 months, if I buy a house in city B, and I still mainly live in city A, but let's say I spent 12 months in city B for some reason, but I still mainly live in city A, I don't pay taxes in city B as a secondary house. Now, if you're talking about a place, let's say a bungalow colony, where everybody only lives for 2 or 3 months, or Hamptons, or whatever it is, summer houses, I believe that you don't need 12 months for that. You need 1 season for it, because that's the same idea. It's the one season would count as the same. It's you own it for 12 months and you have it 3 months you participate. Nobody lives it the rest of the months. You don't go based on darsham. This is the dira over there. Well, I'm not 100% sure, but that's how I would understand it. By the way, if you have a Shana Mu'beres, the Shevet HaLevi says, it's mashma, that since it says Yud Beis Chodesh, Yud Beis Chodesh, and also Yud Beis Chodesh, it's 12 months, not 1 year. It's not like in other things that sometimes we say Shana. Over here it's Yud Beis Chodesh. Yud Beis Chodesh is 12 months, not... So if you have a Shana Mu'beres, the year would end a month before, the 12 months would obviously end before the end of the 13th month. The Ramah brings a bunch of other dinim over here. Number one, if you know, there's a bunch of Yeshemims. He says, if you know that the person bought a dira for the purpose of living there, he becomes chayav at that moment, and you don't have to. The city doesn't have to wait 12 months to start charging him. So what's the mechaber talking about? 12 months is when you don't know if he bought it for the purpose of living here. So if you don't know if you bought it for the purpose of living, you don't have clarity, then you have to wait 12 months. But otherwise, if you know that he bought it for the purpose of living, it becomes chayav the moment he bought it. The Ramah says, Yeshemim, if somebody rents, each Yeshemim there's no disagreement on, except for one. He says, if somebody rents for 12 months, it means he signed the lease for 12 months, Yeshemim, it becomes chayav right away, because it's already 12 months. You don't have to wait till the end of the 12 months to become chayav. It already shows that you're semi-permanently residing in this place. But then he says another Yeshemim which says Bichlal not, faket, not schirus Bichlal not. Kana also only if you have a proof that the person is intending to live there. But you don't even need 12 months. It's Yeshemim which go the opposite, all the way to the other extreme. Some Yeshemim say even schirus, even if he's sochar for Beis Chodesh, you could start right away to make him as a member. Now you ask me why am I discussing this? Very simple. If there's elections for Vada Kol, and they say if you're in Kailo, does that count as you're a resident or not? We'll get to it soon, but that's the whole discussion. Huh?
What was
the other extreme is Soicher Bichlal Nat. The Ramah doesn't say those words, but that's it. Yeah, he's not only Kana, and only with Yud Beis Chodesh, and only with Daitel Ishtakeya. Daitel Ishtakeya with Kana, and then you wait Yud Beis Chodesh, then you could charge him taxes. Yeah, I know, but Matashim doesn't acknowledge the Ramah. Matashim was a Sfadi, he only goes back on the Mechaber. He explains what the Mechaber says. Then there's in the middle, they say there's no difference between Soicher or Koine. We always follow the 12 months, the 12-month rule. Whether it's a Soicher or it's a Koine, we wait 12 months. At the end of 12 months, you start charging him. The Ramah then continues. It says, Alma, if somebody receives a house b'Yerusha or b'Matana, it's not the same as Koine. The Smeh also brings it on the Mechaber. And then the Ramah continues, Avlam Yesh Minag, you go after the Minag. The Smeh says, Avlam Yesh Minag applies to only this din of Yerusha and Matana. If there's a din, if there's a minhag in the city that when you receive a house of Matana, you become obligated right away in taxes, then yeah, be Yerusha. Happens to be. Huh?
What would be the difference between Kana and Yerush? So you're less active, if you're...
Kana means you're intending to live here. Yerusha could be I'm selling it. I mean, if I live in Los Angeles and I was Yerush a house in Crown Heights, does that mean I'm going to move to Crown Heights? Legally, I have to pay property taxes. Yes, so the minhag is din of the machus is I already been responsible for property taxes. The question is, do I become a resident? Do I become chayiv and all the chiyuvim of the city? Because I was Yerush something, I received a matana. Not a Yerusha, so a person decided that he likes my shura when they gave me a house. Okay, no, dafka, I want to move here. So and doesn't mean that I want to live here. Unless it's a minhag, that's how it goes. Happens to be the Shevet HaLevi points out in the Shurim that the Trumas Hadeshin says that the din of minhag, the Trumas Hadeshin was before the Ramah, so it's not on the Ramah. So it says that it just points out that Trumas Hadeshin says that the din of minhag applies to everything. The Ramah, obviously, so the Trumas Hadeshin disagrees with him, but the Trumas Hadeshin says that when it comes to minhag and it comes to these kinds of things, minhag takes over all of them. So if there's a minhag for renting, if there's a minhag for buying, if there's a minhag for 12 months, if there's a minhag for less, for more, it overrides everything. Next thing the Rama says, if somebody is stuck in a town for 12 months because he was sick or because of it's not considered a ben ha'ir. Then the Rama says, if you make money in town, you have to pay taxes the amount that you equal to, as in accordance with the amount that you made. Kfiya moment. Kfiya moment usually means you're gvir, you pay kfiya moment. Kfiya moment means you made a certain amount of money in this town. You profited from this town. Hey, participate in this town. Comes to taxes, happens to be if I live in New York and I work in New Jersey part of the time, I have to pay a certain percentage of taxes in New Jersey. Mata Shimon adds a point and he says in Sifkat and Yud that if you, it's mashma from the Mata Shimon, it's not so clear, it's mashma from the Mata Shimon that if you have a permanent business in the city, even if you don't live there, it's no more kefiyah mam and shirviach. Then you became mamash like a resident. This discussion of kefiyah mam and shirviach is when I come, I travel, I stopped, I made a detour, I was traveling through the whole America and I spent 3 weeks in Crown Heights and I sold the talais. Fine, sorry. But if I open up a business here and I live in New Jersey and I drive every day to my business in Crown Heights or Fakert, then I pay. And I pay like a full resident. The Smeh says, in the name of the Ran, that if somebody marries a woman from a certain town, it's not a proof that he has to live there, that he's planning on living there b'kviyus. Rather, he has to, the city people need a hoichacha that he's planning on living there. That's what the Ran says. But if he has a raya, then pasha that he's a toishav right away. That is the way the Ran looks at it. The Ran lived in France and just married somebody from a town. Doesn't mean you're planning on you could move whatever you want. The Radbaz says, the Radbaz says, you marry a woman, you have no right to pick her up and move somewhere else. There's those takanas that you can't get up and just marry a woman from Kahir and decide you want to move to Syria. So, but the moment you marry somebody, you become ben ha'ir right away. Unless you made a t'nai l'chatchila that with her that you'll be able to travel, that you move out. You could move out afterwards. Then you don't become permanent. So it's clear that Bachrim who are in yeshiva are not considered permanent residents, even if they're 4 years in Crown Heights, not considered permanent residents. And you're in Galai Torah and Kaila and are looking for shluchas, not bnei ha'ir, because they're also not planning. Even if they're 12 months, nobody's really wanting to stay unless you're in Kaila over here and you're committed for 12 months. You don't really plan on being for 12 months. You want to get out as fast as possible in shluchas. So lav dafka you consider the resident. That's nafkamina. But Kaila and Galai should not be voting in elections in Crown Heights. Unless there's a bylaws that say forget, huh?
12 months technically. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be the shtakesha, right?
Depends who. Depends which of the three shittas, yeah? One of the shittas says that you need to have, that you have kana, daita l'shtakeya, and then you wait 12 months. And schilus b'chol, nothing. The most extreme one, schilus is nothing. Only kana l'shtakeya and 12 months. Yeah.
That's to make him pay.
To make him pay, yeah.
Not to give him rights.
To give him rights. So in New York, if you live 30 days, according to the law, you have to change your license already to the new place. Now, what happens if the person claims, I don't live here, and the people of the city say, you do live here? The Smeh brings him Maharam Mirzburg. The Bnei Ha'ir have to make a shvuah or to bring a raya, and they're trusted. And if they don't want to take a shvuah and they don't want to bring a raya, then the other person takes a shvuah and he becomes pater. I want to conclude with two small chuvas in the Sheres Yehuda. They're both in your book, and also Siman Zayin, Siman Ches. You're going to see it in your book, page 46, 47. You look at it, it's a total of 25 lines. Issues in two towns. This was the first Chuvah, Siman Zayin, is about the city of Harochitz. How was it? Harachitz was like, let's call it the main village. And around it was a bunch of little derfalach with Yidden. Some of the derfalach were registered in Harachitz, in their book, and they would pay taxes or whatever it is, they would participate. And some villages were not. And became a whole dispute, who's responsible to pay for what? The main community in Harachitz would collect money, and people would say, the people from the little villages didn't want to participate in Harachitz. Harachitz didn't want to participate in the expenses of the little villages, and the little villages which weren't part of the cheshbon. What's their din? So it says over there, they made a pshara, the Parnasei Akol of Harachitz made a pshara. Half of the expenses of Harachitz is going to be paid by the city and the villages. And another part will be the villages which are registered, because they all benefit from it. And the other half should be paid by the city and the villages which are registered and the villages which are not registered. So let's say you would have 100 people in Harachitz and another 100 people in all the villages around that are registered. And then you have another 100 people in villages which are not registered. So let's say all the expenses of Harachitz with the surrounding registered villages are $100,000 a year. So you take split in half. 50,000 is going to be divided between the 100 people who live in Harachitz and the 100 people who are in the villages who are registered in Harachitz. And the other 50,000 is going to be divided between the 100 people who are in Harachitz, the 100 people who are in the villages which are registered, and the 100 people in the villages which are not registered. And the same thing for the expenses in their places. People of Harachitz would also pay for the expenses in the other villages. And it includes permanent expenses and temporary expenses and everything else. And he concluded that Sheres Yehuda says, and just like the people, let's say the people from this village, yeah, how much are they paying? They're paying only half of their village expenses because it's being divided with everybody else. And they're also paying only half of Harachitz's village expenses because it's being divided between everybody else. Same thing, the people of Harachitz are paying half of their expenses and half of the expenses of the villages around it. That's in Harachitz, but that was a pshara that the Parnasei Akol did. Seems like the Sheres really liked the pshara that the Parnasei Akol came with, because Siman Ches is talking about a similar dispute in Yanovich, the Maril city. Or it was the other way around. At first the Maril gave, because the Yanovich is a psak, and Harachitz is not a psak. So in Yanovich, the psak, because the Siman Ches over there was a Teres psak. And he said over there was only talking about the ones that are registered but don't live, and the ones that live in Yanovich, and people who live in the villages next to Yanovich who are registered as part of the main Kehillah in Yanovich. And Maril says like this, he says, people who live, let's say, in the village, and they're registered in Yanovich, they will participate in the Hoitzois in their city, and they will also participate in the gap of the Hoitzois in Yanovich. And the people who are in Yanovich will participate in their Hoitzois of their city, and will also participate in the gap of the other one. And the Maril says, being that according to my cheshbon, it comes out kimat shave b'shave, almost equal, so therefore it should be chetzi chetzi. Each person will pay half to the city where he lives, half of the expenses, they'll calculate half, 50% of the village expense will be divided by the village people, and then they'll also participate in 50% of the Yanovich expenses, and the people in Yanovich will participate in 50% of the Yanovich expenses, and 50% in all the villages around it.
Each one lives in his own city. If it's anyways the same amount, why can't one?
Because then the people, the community in Yanovich is not going to want to give services to the other people. And not every city had a sheikhet and a moil and everything else, and they were paid from the community. Yeah, so that is essentially, when it comes to this Nekuda, that's the real essentially I want to discuss Siman Kuf Samach Gimel, even though it's not part of the cheshbon in the Seder HaLimud of Kailah. The next year is going to be on Siman Kuf Samach.